Hey guys, another CEO Wisdom podcast with Jessie J. She is CEO and co-founder at Law Notion. So we're gonna talk about law tech startup. That's gonna be interesting. We're gonna talk AI today, foundership, CEOship, everything in between. Jessie, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a bit more about Law Notion.
Yes, great. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for having me here. So I am Jessie. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Law Notion. And Law Notion is an AI-based legal tech company. So we use AI to automatically analyze regulation, case law, and compliance standards so that our solution could help policymakers to easily analyze regulatory landscape and design better regulations, and also help lawyers to conduct legal research more effectively and efficiently. Thank you.
Right. First question, why did you decided to found the company in 2021? You had a job before that. How was the transition?
Yeah, so actually my co-founder is a PhD in data science. So we actually originally have a data science consultancy 5 years ago, and where we help using AI on top of different data to help clients uncover the intelligence. And we more and more uncovered that was a time when natural language processing, so AI had been applied in numerical data quite long ago. So let's say financial sector, you can predict the number, etc. But applying to textual document at that time, it just an emerging and haven't had let's say more impactful advancement specific on regulatory data, which is a big area. And we also, so that is something that we have experienced mostly on AI, and then looking at the application where we have helping different clients, organizations utilizing AI and data. And then also it's also then at that time there is the Department of Business and Energy Industrial Strategy at that time. They also open a competition, so they're calling from AI company to help using natural language processing technology to analyze regulation and prove that there is a more efficient way to analyze regulation. So we won that competition, is where we then developed a prototype from it, and that is where it started from. So it's based on a past history on AI and data, and also, of course, it's the right timing with that the UK government wanted to use AI to analyze regulation.
Right. So do you only sell to the UK government here? Because I see management consultancies and consultancies and commercial lawyers as well. Tell us about each of these channels and how you sell to these folks.
So actually, at the moment, in terms of government, we're mostly selling to UK government because in order for regulation, we need to incorporate law, but we're adding into Canadian data. Before we can sell to a target audience in a specific region, we need to have regulation and case law data in that region. And for UK government, it's a mix of different channels. So firstly, of course, they have public tendering. So if a government already know that they are in need of certain services, then they will public a tender. So then they have a proposal, then we respond to it. There are different channels where they publish it. And secondly, it's also when the government probably haven't have a thought about they need this service, maybe we can respond to have a look at some thought leadership or conference and kind of inspire them to understand that they might need such a service, then start with discussion. But then eventually, because of public procurement, we do eventually all come through the public tendering, and different company vendor provided competing with it, bidding, and then they select it. In terms of management consultancies, actually, it's a more narrow segment of this. So we are more looking to specifically think tank. So they're advising in government, so using regulatory insight on that part. So that is a traditional B2B sales. It's mostly on event, content marketing, and outreach. And for commercial law, it's actually a new solution that we just added this year. So we are currently on a beta testing mode. And I think so what we have right now is mostly what we have interesting more some law firm that, let's say, mostly more, especially with the advance of AI, especially the new infamous ChatGPT, and then more interest, I think, this year have gone to especially legal practice of how it could help in such a long way. So at the moment, it's a new solution for lawyers that we are ongoingly pursuing.
And what's the fundamental problem behind regulation? Is it that it's not clear the way it's written, it's communicated, and it's not super clear on how the law and the new regulation should be applied?
I think it's not necessarily the language is right. I think it's the historical accumulation. Let's say just in the UK, how many, there are hundreds of years of history of regulations out there, and different departments have made different regulations, and some department might have regulate overlapping topic in a way. So let's say if you're regulating let's say manufacturing companies, then you are just probably regulating the product conformity of it. But there are other departments also regulating, for example, workers' welfare or environmental protection. And sometimes here, then you have not just because you as a department that you made the regulation to regulate this business, but you not necessarily have the oversight of what other departments have that also affect the business in the sector that you apply with. And that would really help if, especially there are so many regulations out there from different departments, instead of reading it or existing in a corporate knowledge, in the sense of there are certain people in the organization that know that knowledge and can tell you, but it might changes, you need to update it. So it's a good use of the technologies, in the sense of here is more, we're talking about big data. They keep adding it, keep changing it, and it's having them to not having them either stay in corporate knowledge in the sense of only certain people exist incorporate that knowledge. Okay, I need to know, then I talk to that department's people, they might tell me, I talk to that. But instead, if you are able to have AI, let's say, to help you, okay, these are the regulations apply for these sectors, these are about this topic quickly, not just regulation, what are they related to each other? Are they overlapping? And these are something that you don't necessarily need to spend a policy analyst time, because policy analyst time is supposed to sit on top of this intelligence and say, if we were to remove certain burden, what should we do? Or is there any gap in that? And then we start the consultation with business. So I think technology here is to augment their workflow. There are certain things that they don't necessarily have to spend this time on. And if they have a better intelligence and visibility of the landscape of the regulation, that is the baseline for them to either propose a better regulation without a feedback from business, or when there's emerging things to regulate, and they can easily respond to that because they already know the existing landscape. Let's say if we were to say we need to have a new net zero and environmental protection, before we say should we add more regulation, we need to first see what are the pollution standard, how many apply for it, do we have any gap, and who is enforcing it, are they enforcing enough? So then you can say, okay, what else should I propose? Or similarly to AI, which in the UK there is not, or blockchains, any of this new emerging technology, before you say you propose, and now because it's a new, right, so there's not much regulation in, let's say, AI or blockchain, but ongoingly in next 5 to 10 years there will be more and more and more on this regulation. Then as that will be a time that you need AI. Actually, for a regulation that is relatively new, AI, blockchain, this have relatively new piece of regulation, you don't necessarily need AI to analyze, but it is a trend that in the future a lot of business will be involving in AI blockchain, and it's that the time will be useful.
And what position in the government will monitor that data? And I'm still not exactly clear how governments would monitor the data of businesses they regulate, and how that would affect their potential policy change. Is it to be more appreciated as governments that they would use that platform, or is it to actually enforce their policies and get paid if these policies are not respected?
And when you say monitor, do you mean monitoring what kind of regulations are out there, or monetizing when you say get paid in terms of fine, you mean?
Yeah, fines, because governments, like we talked to you and I last time, they're like businesses. Their goal is to make money, to make good money and to spend that money on the population to satisfy that population. Population are the clients. So with that being said, policies and regulations are also made to have a happier population, generally speaking, but you always have these lawbreakers or people that do not want to respect them, and when that happens you find them and you make money out of those fines. So that's the incentive. So does your platform allow to monitor for people that break these policies, and finding them and calculating the ROI of some policies that I would make as a government?
Yeah, I think maybe just first, I think having fines as an income is undoubtedly an income. However, I don't think that is what they would measure as policymaker as a impact of their businesses or their policy, not necessarily just their mandate. Their mandate to improve, it depends on different departments. Let's say the departments of that regulate and environment, their mandate will be improve the standard environment, reducing the emissions. So their KPI in this way is not monetary. Its KPI in this way is reduction of emission improvement and less pollution. Or if they're regulating, let's say, a product conformity or customer, then their KPI will be less customer claims or less customer complaints and more customer satisfaction or safety. But regardlessly, the fine itself, of course, it is undoubtedly, but it's not, as far as I know of, majority of the UK government, that's not part of their KPI to measurement that they have it. But one of the things that they could use the tool for is, let's say, is one, you were able to easily, when you devise a policy, then you need to consider what are the non-compliance penalties. Should it be fined? If it's fined, how much? Should it be imprisonment? Imprisonment, how much? And that when you wanted to propose which level of punishment it is, then penalty, then you might need to make sure it's consistent across a different region, and also is appropriate, which means that you need to first compare historically similar title regulation, what kind of penalties are there. And secondly, you might want to see, sometimes you don't necessarily see the same thing. So let's say if a food standard, department regulating food, right? If the penalty, if you are making sure that it's a safety, customer who either doesn't die or have a health issue, it's a very severe consequence in the consumer. You wanted to say, okay, then what kind of penalty should I put into it? In addition to referencing the similar food regulation, you might want to reference product conformity, because it also causes severe damage to people. If, let's say, any furniture is not safe, people might die. So you might also reference those kind of regulations. So it's a way to, so penalty is a way to make sure that people don't make it, so because the mandate of the government is either improve health, food safety for the consumer, improve the safety of the consumer types, and then that mandate, as far as I know, that is relatively less. I don't think any UK government would have mentioned that increasing the fine income is their KPI or ROI.
They don't mention it, but for example, speeding tickets in Quebec, like, it's been strongly abused by the police, and it is known that it is how they derive a very good amount of their revenue. Another pretty obvious example is taxes, defining tax brackets with policies and so forth. They obviously make a bunch of money out of that. And I do think that, yeah, well, you can enforce laws, but I have a weird theory of, if government would manage their government as a business rather than this social this social thing, I do think the results would be better, which is, how can I make the most money without annoying people, my customers, and how can I respend that money the smartest way possible into social causes, that is. And then how do you measure the impact of that? How do you measure the pain relief and the happiness? My question, well, what do you think about that model that I just suggested?
I think that is to say the income of the government, let's say the department, that regulation, they don't necessarily come from the fines, as you say, they mostly come from every year budget. And the budget is mostly come from a share of GDP. So certain business, certain departments that regulate certain sector, also, let's say, Department of Business Trade, they need to encourage of growth of trade, the economy, so then they have better GDP next year, or better income of taxes is where they have the most, right? And that, so not necessarily fine is the one that they, let's say, the income stream, the majority income is still the taxes from the people, from the business, meaning that the business have to strive. People, meaning that people have to also earn wealth, or they transact, right? So if let's say food or consumer products are good and they have a good relationship between the business and consumer, and then more and more trade will happen. So that is the more healthy cycles of the, at least is what is the original, let's say, goal and standard of most of the government, is to increase the trade where they have income, but not necessarily mostly looking at the fine or as the income where they then subsidize. It's mostly the whole, of course it is part of income, but as far as it's not, it's probably relatively small part of it. It is a local small enforcement of it.
You'd be surprised to see in Quebec the $150 laws, that speeding tickets, they distribute probably 1,000 of those. So we'd be talking, yeah, about 1,500,000 per day. That's pretty significant in the state of Quebec. I want to talk about sales in terms of selling to the government. You know, you mentioned it's various departments. So is that how you segment your CRM per department? And your goal is to sell to as many departments in the government as possible? Do you also sell to extra government entities? Like, how do you separate your sales CRM, and how hard is it to sell to government folks?
I think it is no one thinks it's very challenging to sell to public sector. It's very long cycle or the entry point of it. First of all, also there is not a large amount of department, but each department most likely they are relatively big. Each team they have their own budget most likely, and they have own spending of this. So actually our unit is team within the department, not the department itself. Because each team you have a very different focus and policy. So because when you make your proposition of them or you publish different tenders are different. So in addition to central government, then you have a non-departmental body, they might execute certain of the responsibility, and you have agency that enforce certain. So there are the different types. Some is making regulation, monitoring, and some is enforcing it. And then you also have other type of, so there are the different type, but within the department itself is relatively big, so it will be a small team inside is where we kind of segment. So what we segment is about the area that they regulate in. Even so, let's say, are they regulating environment? So because then our messaging of that is different, and then different than the area if they are regulating in employment, welfare, or regulating in financial sectors. So that is where we different than, okay, regulating financial sector, then you have the exchange treasury, then you have financial conduct authority. So we segment mostly on the area that they regulate, because then we form the similar messaging about how this tool will help and how the industry is changing, why it's needed that. And they might include central government, might include regulator, might include not department agency. But because they're regulating the same scene, they will get that why it's needed and how they can use that.
Right. And what's the price tag of the software? How do you sell that? Is it per seat? Is it per department? How do you go with this?
Yeah, it's a standard SaaS, so it's per seat. So we currently have 3 levels. So the standard one is about £100 a GBP per month per users. So then you have a bit more advanced, you're 150, a bit lower 50. So it's a relatively cost-effective tools, because that is one of the good part about SaaS, because also historically, let's say when a government wants to propose a regulation change, they might hire a consultancy to do this work and then propose, okay, this much regulation here, I can propose this. But if we analyze it in all sectors, meaning that all our previous effort can be split across all the users that use it. So that's why it makes the unit cost lower for each one, rather than if you every department do it differently or just for their own team. And then of course the unit cost and marginal cost is higher. So that is SaaS, our solution would be able to make it more affordable. And eventually, if you have lower costs for taxpayers to design better regulation, that is one of the important parts to have it and more efficient.
Right. And what's the approximate cost of the software? Are we talking about 1,000 per month, 10,000 per month?
Yeah, it's about 100 per month is the average, or 100 to 150 per month. Yeah, for the regulation.
Really cheap.
Yes, for the regulation, if you want to download and everything, will be 200 per month. If you want a case law, so the average standard one is, yes, it's a relatively cheap option. So
Per user, right? Yeah, that's very affordable for folks that make a bunch of money on a daily basis.
But you'll be surprised that actually there's competing priorities that the government is not necessary because they still have so many things that to spend on. We will also think that it's a relatively affordable, but it's relatively like, and the government is not as a private entity. If we pitch the point that, okay, use our tool with this cost, you could save this much money because you save this much time. But the proposition to public sector is not as easy as that because they don't, each department, they don't necessarily say, okay, saving this cost and time is not necessarily that easy pitch to that, to how they spend that money. So that is the challenge because they don't function as a private entity that you can easily say, these are the outcome you spend on this software, you could save this much money and can earn this much money. It's as clear as that. Is the simple solution proposition. But for public sector, it's less because their mandate at this time might not necessarily about reduce cost or design a better regulation. Right now, they might actually need to get more subsidies for, I don't know, after previously spend more money on COVID or spend more money on other things or housing, mortgage now. And so that is the challenge of selling to public sector. Is not very easy to highlight, let's say, the cost benefit efficient. Yes, you can design better regulation, but it depends on the time and the competing priority that they have.
Right.
It's not necessarily as simple as that. I wish, but
yeah,
it's not.
and it's not like, hey, I come in as a salesman and I convince them. Everything is has some kind of timeline. Do you have to go through RFPs to sell to them, or is it not that? How much control do you have on the sell? Is everything like pre-decided for them, or do you still have influence over their decisions?
It really depends. So let's say if they have an idea that they need to purchase legal research tool, so every year, the department in April, they will propose their budget for next year in the treasury in front of it, so they get a specific budget. If they already knew, they will have applied for that budget upfront, then it's within that budget, there's no change on that because the budget is already there, unless it's only can be less, it cannot be more. And then if they didn't have that, let's say they didn't apply for the budget upfront because they didn't know they need such a tool, and then if we, let's say, have an interest from department, then they will still need to, I mean, it depends on the size. There are smaller contract size, the department, if they have, let's say, remaining some budget, they might be able to use it flexibly. For example, this low-cost SaaS. But if they have more users, they need a bigger size of budget. They need to apply for next year. So they need to wait for the next round to apply for the budget. So actually, rooms in a way they normally would have a fixed budget, and probably what you can change of is how many users, how many different packages you split across them to fit their goal.
Right. Do they have rebates, or do they have incentives of programs like, hey, we need the government to use more technology and to go more in the cloud, so we will help this organism with 20% of their software cost? Does this happen? Is there such program so that they can save on your software, or?
Not that I'm aware of. I think they do encourage the adoptions of, let's say, they are much more open now on the AI solutions, but they have a specific evaluation of AI solutions because the previous public tendering, they're tendering consultancy work or software as a standard, so they know how to evaluate the solutions because each public tendering, but now it's the AI solutions. Let's say AI gets not 100% correct, meaning that here and then, let's say we think this regulation is about these sectors. Most likely it's correct. We improve the accuracy, but it still has small percentage of inaccuracy. It doesn't have the right precision or coverage. So they need to be aware of that as well when they purchase it. But I think that the incentive I haven't heard of, but I think there will be growing awareness of what they need to be aware of, what the tool can or cannot do, and what level of degree of reliance should be when they were purchasing solutions that are using any advanced technology that they might not comprehend and need to know. Because if you know the limitation of the tool that you're adopting, then you know how to use the result appropriately at that point.
Last question for you. The Brexit was so like undefined as per what would happen. It's a good example of how regulation is kind of confusing. Well, at least for me, an outsider. what's up with Brexit? Is it moving forward? Is it like more realistic now? Is it more defined? And how is that gonna impact your company?
Yeah, I think Brexit, it is a very big I don't think it's wrong to say it's quite a mess in a certain time, especially for certain period of time. And now I think blurry with the pandemic, it seems like it has so many times ago. I think we need to consider not as a everything would be defined as the time what Brexit agreement is, because I think the whole trade relationship, regardless of whether we have Brexit or not, is evolving. And because Britain has Brexit, the relationship have within EU countries or even other countries will evolve with changes. So that is one of the challenge of that, is because whenever there's changes, it's not always immediately clear to all the manufacturers or the people who are conducting businesses, or not only about this Brexit, as like we have these new laws about privacy or GDPR, whatever new law introduced, regardless of having this. So Brexit is one big event that have a collective change of many regulation, but there are actually every year there are new changes brought by different big event that actually continuously moving the changes. And now the biggest crisis in the UK is not necessarily the Brexit. Of course, this is the high inflation rate, the consistent and high interest rate, which is the mortgage crisis. And also this is every day have competing deadlines of things that might, and with the steep change of interest rate, inflation rate, that affect many businesses as well. So it's not just regulation make effect, or big country decisions or big economic event also make a lot of big impact for individual and businesses. And that is a challenge, if there's so many things to keep up to date with, and there's so many things that we need to know how to respond it. And it's not necessarily that, okay, we know how to respond maybe last week, this week has changed now. So that is the challenge of the ever-changing landscape. That's how it goes.
Yeah, I love RegTech because it's kind of a boring sector that a lot of founders don't want to get into, but it's a gold mine. Sell cycle or long, it's kind of hard for that same reason. There's not a lot of people in it. So congrats on your business. Yeah, I think it's gonna go far. I think the niche is quite good. Where can people find out more about you, Jessie?
Yes, so you can link to me on LinkedIn or contact us at lawnotion.co.uk and our company page in LinkedIn, and to reach out. And if you want anyone to discuss anything more or interested to try out the product as well, and we're good to have a discussion.